You see the headlines all the time, right? Iran, a country that just seems to be in a constant state of emergency. But what if I told you that all the unrest, the economic turmoil, it's not random. It's not just bad luck. It's actually a symptom of something much deeper, a kind of code that was written into the country's DNA over the last 100 years. And today, we're going to crack that code.
To really get a feel for what's at stake, let's do a little thought experiment. I want you to imagine it's the near future, say the year 2026. The world is watching, holding its breath, because Iran is teetering right on the very edge of collapse. So how did we get here? I mean, what does it even look like when a modern country just falls apart?
Well, the first thing to go is the money. The Iranian rial, which was already struggling, has gone into a complete and total freefall. We're talking about a black market rate where it takes almost 1.5 million rials to get a single US dollar. Just try to wrap your head around that for a second. That's not just a number. That's a lifetime of savings for a family, completely vaporized, practically overnight. And when the currency dies, hyperinflation is right behind it. Imagine you go to the store to buy food for your family, and the price of basic things, bread, rice, has shot up by 70% in 1 year. That's not just an inconvenience. That means people can't afford to eat. The social fabric just starts to rip apart, and you see protests sparking everywhere, which quickly boil over into nationwide chaos.
Now, this whole scenario, it might sound a little bit like science fiction, but it's a very plausible future that is rooted in a very real past. So the real question we have to ask is, how could things get this bad? To figure that out, we need to stop looking at the symptoms and start diagnosing the disease, a condition that's been developing for over a century.
So, let's get into it. Here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with the century-long struggle that really set the stage for everything. Then we'll look at the complicated legacy of the 1979 revolution. It's a real double-edged sword. After that, we'll get into the guts of the problem, a bizarre economic setup called the patch system. And finally, we'll see the tough choices Iran is facing right now.
All right, so the first, and maybe the most important piece of this whole puzzle, starts way before the revolution. It starts with the discovery of oil. You see, for Iran, its entire modern history is basically the story of a long, bitter fight to control its own natural resources, a fight that would shape its destiny for the next 100 years.
And you know, to really understand just how unique and confrontational Iran's path was, it's really helpful to look right next door at its rival, Saudi Arabia. Both of them are swimming in oil, right? But they took completely different roads when it came to dealing with the West. And those different choices led to totally different futures.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at this. Iran was the trailblazer, right? The first one to stand up and directly challenge Western control with this aggressive takeover back in 1951. Now, Saudi Arabia, they were watching. They learned from Iran's painful experience and chose a much slower, more cooperative route of just gradually buying out the Western companies. You could almost say Iran took all the bullets, while Saudi Arabia cleverly used Iran's struggle to get a better deal for itself. And that big confrontation? It all came to a head with one man, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. In '51, he did what no one thought was possible. He nationalized the British-controlled oil industry. The reaction from the West was immediate and absolutely brutal. They slapped a total embargo on Iran, the economy just collapsed. And then, only 2 years later, the CIA and MI6 engineered a coup that threw him out of power. But here's the thing about his legacy. Yes, Mossadegh himself was crushed, but what he did drew a brand new line in the sand for the entire Middle East. His act of defiance created this powerful new idea that countries could and should control their own resources. So you could say he lost the battle, but he completely changed the rules of the game for everyone else.
Okay, so you have this coup that puts a Western-backed monarch, the Shah, back in absolute power. How do we get from there to the Islamic Revolution in 1979? Well, the way the Shah ruled didn't just create the conditions for a revolution, it pretty much made one inevitable.
Now, under the Shah, Iran was modernizing like crazy. But, and this is a huge but, it was incredibly unequal. You had elites in the cities living these lavish Western lifestyles, while huge parts of the country were just left in the dust. The poverty rate was over a quarter of the population. And the countryside, almost no one had access to clean water. And a so-called white revolution ended up bankrupting farmers, forcing them into these massive slums around Tehran. It was a ticking time bomb of anger and inequality.
And when that bomb finally went off, the new Islamic Republic actually delivered on a lot of its promises to the poor and forgotten. I mean, just look at these numbers. The results were, wow, they were dramatic. Literacy rates tripled. The years of schooling for women went up more than 7 times. The poverty rate was cut by more than half, and access to things like clean water went through the roof.
From a social welfare perspective, for millions of regular Iranians, the revolution was a huge success.
But, and this is probably the most important point of this entire explainer, here's the twist. While the revolution was a success in redistributing wealth and services, it was ultimately incomplete. Think of it like this. They did a social revolution, but not a structural one. They didn't really change the fundamental wiring of the economy or the state, leaving this weird, tense system where old and new power structures were forced to exist side by side.
So what do you do when you have an incomplete revolution? You have to improvise, right? You have to create these special patches to kind of hold the whole thing together and protect it. And this brings us right to the very core of why Iran's economy is so paralyzed today.
This cobbled-together solution is what experts call the patch system. It's basically a parallel state, a shadow government, and it was built to do two things. First, protect the new regime from all its enemies, and second, deliver all those social welfare promises it made. This system stands on two enormous pillars that operate almost completely outside of public view.
So pillar number one is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Now this isn't just an army, it's an economic and political giant. Its main job, its reason for being, is to keep the regime in power, no matter what. And to pay for all of that, it has built up a gigantic business empire controlling everything from construction and telecoms to the country's oil and gas. It truly is a state within a state, and it answers to nobody except the supreme leader.
And the second pillar? That would be the Bonyads, or religious foundations. These are huge, tax-free business empires built on assets that were seized from the old regime. Their job is to act like a parallel welfare state, handing out social services. But they operate as a total black box. There's no government oversight, which means huge sums of money are moved around with absolutely zero transparency or accountability.
The sheer size of this patch system is what creates this permanent gridlock. Just look at this chart. When you put them together, the IRGC and the Bonyads are thought to control over half of Iran's entire economy. Let that sink in. Over half the economy is run by these opaque, inefficient institutions whose main goal isn't to grow the country, but just to protect themselves. You can see why real economic reform is basically impossible.
Okay, so you've got this gigantic, clunky internal system that's bleeding the economy dry. And at the same time, you have decades of crippling international sanctions squeezing from the outside. That lethal combination has pushed Iran to a breaking point. It's at a dangerous crossroads now with only two very, very difficult ways forward.
The leadership in Tehran has a choice to make, and neither option is good. Path number one is to attempt radical internal reform. That means taking on the massive power of the IRGC and the Bonyads, forcing them to be transparent and shrinking their control over the economy. It's what the country needs, but it's also politically explosive. Path number two, double down on resisting the outside world. Strengthen alliances, flex military muscle, and try to force the West to lift sanctions. It's a huge gamble that avoids the internal fight, but could lead to a much bigger, more destructive external one.
And honestly, the stakes could not possibly be higher. Because that patch system, as broken as it is also part of the glue that holds the country together. If the whole system were to collapse under its own weight, without some new shared vision ready to replace it, the outcome probably wouldn't be a peaceful democracy. It could be the total fragmentation of the country, civil war, or something even worse.
And that brings us right back to where we started, a nation under unbelievable pressure. The story of modern Iran, really, is a story about a desperate fight for sovereignty, a revolution that never quite finished the job, and a system designed for survival that is now strangling any hope for the future. So the final question isn't really about politics, it's about existence itself. Can Iran figure out a way to defuse its own ticking time bomb before it's too late?